Hi, everybody. Today we are going to talk about our paper. And to start with, my colleague, Dr. Alex Fong, will talk about weird and non-weird notion of oneness in an organization.
Good morning. We begin the paper by adopting the framework provided by Schutter in 1991 to help us understand the two mainstream self-other interaction patterns, which originate from different cultural traditions. The first, the I-centered approach, is given the acronym WEIRD, representing Western, educated, industrial, rich, and democratic. This is an individual-centric cultural characteristics of the West, where the social groups and institutions of society are designed to serve the interests of the individuals. The second, the we-centered approach, is given the acronym non-weird. This is the social-centric cultural characteristic of the West, where the needs of the individuals are subordinate to the needs of the social groups and institutions. What are the implications for leadership and followership? Under the weird tradition, the focus is on active control and exerting influence through changing existing realities. Under the non-weird tradition, the focus is on secondary control and exerting influence through working around existing social realities. We find inspirations from Chinese philosophers, philosophical insights on how oneness can act as a confluence point between the weird and the non-weird approaches. The Chinese philosopher Laozi, 25 centuries ago, states, "He who knows others is wise. He who knows himself is enlightened." As it will be demonstrated by my colleague do so later, he who knows himself as is enlightened can be understood as conscious parts or oneness from within. He who knows others is wise can be understood as conscientious wholes or oneness from between. To connect the conscious parts and the conscientious wholes, it is proposed in our paper that the oneness hypothesis, as advocated by Professor Ivanhoe in 2017, can be deployed. The oneness perspective postulates that everything is interrelated and investigates how highlighting and developing certain kinds of interconnections can bring about improvements of both individuals and larger wholes of which they are a part. Applying the oneness hypothesis to understanding leadership and followership makes sense, as the oneness approach deals with the interconnections between parts and wholes, and the enterprise leadership and followership deal with systems which are made up of individual parts and subsystems. I now hand over to my colleague, Duso.
And following what Alex mentioned about oneness and all the precursors of oneness, we come back to the consciousness inside the individual, which we call oneness within. Oneness within has been studied in literature in so many different ways in different disciplines. In psychology, particularly, it was studied under self-awareness, private self-consciousness, integrative self-knowledge, and self-reflection and insight, and many other different terms. The whole understanding is the capacity of the individual to know him or herself from within and to be able to accept and understand and act on that self-knowledge. And then consciousness between can be a problematic situation in the organizations, especially if we want to look at it in terms of identifying consciousness that forms when the self is not quite aware or did not yet develop the capacity to be aware of oneself, one's problems, self-interest, and needs and fears. Sometimes that self might contract. On the opposite scenario, you can have an expanded self. Again, borrowing the term from Ivanhoe, self-expansion happens when the self is aware and conscious, consciousness from within. And then the area in between two individuals, which we actually look at in terms of consciousness between, is accessible, and it's the two individuals are able to work on that area together, as if it's like a co-creation. So that's a wonderful scenario. And there are some practices to promote that kind of expansion of this and also accessibility of this interpersonal space in the workplace. And I'm going to hand it over to Alex to start with practice.
Yes, we want to emphasize that our paper is not just about theories. We have identified 5 practices under the acronym MARCH, as in the month of March, to support our theoretical framing. I just want to say a few words on practice 1 and practice 3. Practice 1 is about mindfulness practices at the workplace. This is an example of how to cultivate consciousness from within. In recent years, companies from Wall Street to Silicon Valley have started to cultivate mindfulness practices in the workplace. By zeroing in on the present moment through mindfulness practices such as meditation, this is not just an effective way to reduce stress in the workplace, but it is also an effective way to help the leader to focus his or her attention on what needs to be dealt with as a matter of priority. I also want to say something about practice 3, role playing. Role playing is an example of how to cultivate consciousness from between. In recent years, we have also seen role play being increasingly incorporated in business training programs. Role playing business games, exercises, and activities help to build teams, train leadership confidence, develop employee motivation, and improve communications.
And practice 2, appreciative inquiry. As the name implies, appreciation of the other person for who he or she is. The self-acceptance translates into other acceptance. And we are inquiring, meaning we are asking questions rather than making inferences or assumptions based on what it should be. But instead, this whole space becomes a co-creation reality. And then collaborative VR/AR projects, which is possible through the technological developments of today. We can use so many tools on the virtual and augmented reality space to co-create and change some of the realities that people can experiment with and try out consciousness between and conscientious wholes. And then finally, harmony through wholeness practice was proposed by Lee and Lin as trying to convert vertical structures to horizontal ones, so that it becomes more of a co-created reality rather than a mandated reality from one or both parties. So thank you for listening to our presentation on conscious parts and conscientious wholes, and we are happy to answer your questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you.